All right. Welcome to Grid Down Preparedness. My name is Wade. And if this is the first time you're watching a video, please go ahead and give me a like and a subscribe. If you wouldn't mind, that would be great. Trying to keep the bills paid as a furloughed government employee. So anyway, let's move on and talk about what's going on in the world today. We're going to start off with the weather. This could affect your power grid. We're getting towards winter, having winter storms and stuff like that is definitely a risk to the power grid. So we want to make sure that that's not a problem. And what on earth did that pop up over there? Yep, we don't want that up. Okay. So, taking a look at the weather while we wait on some people to show up live. And I do apologize for the low bit rate if the image does go in and out. I'm currently operating on Starlink, so its upload speed with heavy cloud cover can kind of cause some problems. So right now we are looking at a weather application that I found not that long ago, and we're going to go ahead and silence my phone so we don't get a call. And we're also going to silence my work cell phone so it doesn't ring, because I'm pretty sure in the studio here that is in desperate need of some sound deadening. That would be abnormally loud if it were to ring. But you'll hear it vibrate on the desk if I get a work call and have to bounce. But right now we are going to zoom in. There's a couple of weather advisories in the area. Looks like we've got some freezing weather advisories or cold weather advisories, frost advisories, I'd imagine. What is this thing doing? It does not like streaming and zooming at the same time. So you can see the overall view here, and we're zooming in to the middle of the U.S. We've got Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas. Looks like a lot of that area is under some sort of, let's see, we zoom in and it'll tell me, yeah, it's a frost advisory. So that part works. So it'll tell me that county right there is in a frost advisory. It'll tell me its weather station and radar source that's covered by it. So that's a pretty cool feature in this weather app. And shout out to the Ryan Hall Y'all channel. Yeah, I'm getting an error message on the screen that users are going to receive buffering errors. So I do apologize for that. But we're going to keep drudging forward and see what we can do with the live stream here. So that is a frost advisory. So I found this to be a very useful weather app. And I can see now I'm going to need to buy a faster computer and figure out how to get a better internet connection out here in the middle of nowhere. But zooming out on this thing way out to see the whole United States, Canada, Alaska, you can see all of these offshore advisories and warning areas. This is the Hurricane Melissa. That thing is tracking off to the northeast. It's not going to be a threat other than high surf to the east coast of the United States. So there is that. Let's check back in on the live stream and see if YouTube actually says that we're live, given the buffering issues that I was having. Okay, it does say I'm live, and we're going to mute that. Okay, so we are live. I'll have that up on my phone so I can also monitor the comments. The chat is behind my boom mic, so I wonder if I can move that window over here. And I can. Cool. All right, I can see that there. So anything that we talk about today and anything that pops up on the screen, the links are going to be down in the description of this video. Right now, it looks like we're dropping a bunch of frames. So hopefully this live broadcast does work out. If not, I'm probably going to have to record this as a podcast and then upload it that way. But we're going to try to do it live tonight, see if it works for tonight. So if you are watching and you are live in the chat, go ahead and drop a message. But we're going to get into this because we're recording it and it's going to go live right after this is done. So we're going to take a look at space weather timeline because it is one of my opinions that one of the highest threats to the power grid is from space weather. Right now we're looking at a low-level geomagnetic storm with a KP index of 5, and this is a space weather timeline. That link's in the description. Not really anything above normal that would be causing this level of instability other than the BZ is tipped negative. So when it tips negative, we typically have more instability when it couples with the Earth's geomagnetic field. And we'll pop over here to Space Weather Live and we'll kind of take a look at that and see. This is a different source of data. So this is from NOAA, Space Weather Prediction Center, their planetary K index. And these are 3-hour slices looking at the space weather that we currently have going on. So in the US right now, we're looking at a KP3, whereas over in Europe, we're sitting around a KP index of 5. And then this is the AP index that goes up to 400. It's really depending on the solar storms. But you can see right here, we're going to go back from this page. And please ignore the ads on the screen. I haven't paid for a subscription for this yet. But right here, it's going to show that our KP index right now, currently in the United States, is sitting around a KP level 3. Solar wind is clocking in at a moderate speed of 587 kilometers per second. And yes, that's kilometers per second. That is fast. But I want to call your attention over here to the disturbance storm time index. So for part of the day, we kind of popped out above that. Right now, the observed, we're a negative 58 nanotesla down into the negative BZ, and that is what is causing the increased KP index, especially that's observed over in Europe right now. So as that dips further into the negative range, the more intense the geomagnetic storm is going to be. So let's go to split screen so you can see me and transition over to that. And there we are. So I'm on screen. So we can have this discussion about space weather. So the intent of this video tonight is to talk about the ways the power grid can go down. And because it's live, we're getting into the meat of it now that we have some viewers. First source that I want to go to is from congress.gov. And then this is a PDF. The headline and the text of this House committee meeting was about, are we prepared to manage the aftermath of a cyber attack or other failure of the electrical grid? And this is available in the links down in the description below the video. And what's important about this is this was back on April 14th, 2016, and the House committee heard testimony that you could draw the conclusions from if you read the entire text of this, that we are vulnerable to cyber attacks in the power grid. We'll shift over to domestic violent extremist groups targeting of the power grid. So this is actually the same link as this. This is the actual paper discussing about it. So the executive summary, I'll read it to you if you can't see it on the screen, and I'll go ahead and go back to full screen so you can see it. Although threats against infrastructure are hardly a new issue, recent warnings about the resurgence of terrorist threats in the U.S. to the U.S. power grids have come from members of the U.S. Congress and government agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and academic researchers. Ranking high among the various threats to the U.S. power grid is the threat of physical attack by violent extremists, both far left and far right violent extremist groups pose threats to the transmission and distribution components of the U.S. power grid, hereinafter called the grid, transmission grid. Okay, so this stems from a couple of attacks that happened where I believe there was one in North Carolina that was recent, and I believe there was also a second event of several years ago in Oregon where someone targeted substation equipment and was shooting at the substation equipment. In the case of the North Carolina incident, which I believe is here at this CNN source, they actually shot at the substation equipment and actually took out power. Now it says late last year in this article, but this was published in 2023. So this was back around February of 2023. They did fire at two power substations in Moore County, North Carolina, and it left 45,000 homes and businesses without power. All of a sudden, at about 8:45 p.m., 20 shots fired right across the street. Somebody told the CNN affiliate shortly after the December attack. The gunfire hit critical parts of the substation and the power went out. Now, this is important because if you have a coordinated attack at multiple critical substations, if you take out enough of those critical substations, you can have what's called a cascading failure of the power grid, where there's enough instability between the various aspects of the grid that it starts tripping other substations up and downstream offline as a result of terrorist attacks. And I believe years ago there was a study that said, I think there was like 7 or 8 critical substations in the United States that if they were attacked by state actors or domestic terrorist groups, that it would take out the entire U.S. power grid for a long time. Some of these transformers that are at these power stations are long lead items. And one of the things that I see where I work at, we had several pad-mounted transformers that had to get replaced during a project. And the lead time, and this was back during COVID, the lead time went from 18 months to over 24 months. And in some cases, 36 months. We did get one pad-mounted transformer that failed in testing, and we had to wait another 24 months to get a replacement pad-mount transformer. Now, these are slightly larger transformers for industrial facilities, so it's not an off-the-shelf component that you can just go grab. It's not like the transformer on your power pole at your house, or if you live in a subdivision, that pad-mounted transformer that feeds a couple of houses in your neighborhood. These are much larger transformers. When we start talking about in the terms of substation transformers, they are exceptionally large. They're usually oversized loads, and very few of them are actually built and manufactured and assembled in the United States. Most of them come from overseas. China, India are two large producers of large transformers, and those would have to be shipped in, offloaded from a ship, and in severe case scenarios, the lead times on those are greater than 36 months. So if you were to have some sort of coordinated attack on substations and they took out some of the larger transformers to the point where they had a failure and needed to be replaced, they could not be repaired, that would lead to a longer term grid outage. But it's not the worst case scenario. You're looking for the power grid being down several weeks to several months, depending on how they could reroute power and isolate sections of the grid and possibly get other areas back up. So that is a risk, but the duration of that type of outage is kind of low. Another issue is switching to renewable energy. So part of the Green New Deal and the green agenda is dealing with renewables making up a greater portion of the supply for the power grid. So renewables would be things like hydroelectric power, whereas in the United States, we're pretty much maxed out on hydroelectric power generating capacity with the various dams in the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Colorado River areas and everything out west. The rivers that we were able to dam and construct power generation facilities, all of those buildable locations have pretty much been utilized. It's not saying that there's other smaller areas where you could put smaller power stations, but as the majority of rivers in the United States, we've kind of identified over the rise, especially post-World War I through World War II into the 70s and 80s, we've kind of developed all of those areas in the country. A more reliance on wind power and solar, as is the case with my house today. I've been operating off-grid here for 16 days using my portable power stations. And today it was a mostly cloudy day. There was some solar generation. I was able to get the battery packs refilled, but not as it would be on a normal day. My consumption's been very low. And as that solar farms, the energy fluxes when clouds go over you have a dip in energy production, and then when the clouds hit it again, it surges right back. So you do have kind of unstable power generation when it comes to solar. Areas out in the desert Southwest are better for solar, but you have the issue of not having rainfall to wash the dirt and dust off of the panels. So you do lose production efficiencies, and it requires frequent cleaning in desert areas like that. But you do make more power overall in those areas if you keep your panels clean. Wind generation, that is pretty consistent in the Midwest, but those wind generators do suffer failures. They do fail in thunderstorms. They do take oil to run. There's a lot of lubricants. I think there's about anywhere between 500 and 1,500 gallons of oil for lubricant in those larger wind turbines. So that does put the grid at risk if you do have that and a major storm system comes through and messes up a bunch of wind generators. You have an ice storm or a big hail event that passes over a solar field that tears the solar field up. Those are all causes for concern from the environmental side of the power grid. Another risk of the power grid is an electromagnetic pulse and geomagnetic disturbance. So this comes from CISA, which is America's Cyber Defense Agency. And I'm kind of familiar with this because this is some of the stuff that I familiarize myself with for work, because I do manage Department of War now critical infrastructure facilities. An electromagnetic pulse, if you don't know what an electromagnetic pulse is, it's where you have like a nuclear detonation and you have different waves of electromagnetic energy that can couple and fry sensitive electronics. It doesn't necessarily mean that your cell phone is going to get fried, but it could mean that the cell towers could get fried. It's all depending on how close you are to the source when it comes to like a nuclear derived EMP. The closer you are to that emission, the higher the likelihood that sensitive electronic devices are going to get fried by that first electromagnetic pulse wave. The risk to the power grid doesn't come from that first wave. It comes from the second and third waves in an electromagnetic pulse, where it would induce ground currents and induce currents on the power lines themselves. And when you have those differences in potential, that could lead to voltage control issues and your substations tripping offline, if not outright failing from a geomagnetic storm. But let's get back into this article. So the EMPs are associated with intentional attacks using high altitude nuclear detonations, specialized conventional munitions, or non-nuclear directed energy devices. I think those latter two are less likely than a high altitude nuke by a state actor. It was estimated at one time that if a nuclear device was detonated in the magnetosphere about 200 miles above the Midwestern United States, it would produce a significant electromagnetic pulse that in theory would take the power grid down. That is part of the risk. And usually that's a state level actor that's able to pull something off like that. As a matter of fact, in March 2019, there was an executive order issued basically telling the Department of Homeland Security to coordinate and come up with a plan for a grid down situation. And of course, CISA, through the National Risk Management Center, works with government and industry partners to execute the department's EMP and GMD strategy. And the three strategies are: improve risk awareness of electromagnetic threats and hazards, enhance capabilities to protect critical infrastructure, and promote electromagnetic incident response and recovery efforts. So they do have science labs where they actually test out these things, where they do take parts of the grid, they put it in a lab, and they hit it with a locally generated EMP inside of a building, and they see what fails, and they work on ways either how to shield it or how to predict through the first series of high frequency waves that come in, or VHF or UHF waves, the type that would affect your cell phone and other sensitive small electronics. If they can detect that, usually they can cause the substations to trip offline within a second or two and mitigate the damage to that infrastructure. But that currently, to my knowledge, is not actually in place. This is a Forbes article kind of covering the same thing: protecting America's grid from EMP attacks. And they call out China using their intelligence collection balloons and electronic warfare and reconnaissance. Those things really shouldn't be dismissed, as this article says. It's pretty easy to put a nuclear EMP device on a weather balloon and send it up there and go, it's just a weather balloon. It flies across the country, and then when it gets over critical infrastructure, it could detonate. This could be a military base, could be a nuclear power plant, could be a major city, but it could, theoretically, you could deploy a nuclear EMP and have localized effects, such as over a power station, over a major substation, or even over a major city. And depending on the altitude, it may not have any net effects down at the surface. But most of these weather balloons are above 50,000 feet. Some of them go upwards of 100,000 feet. It just depends on the altitude, but generally above 50,000 feet, a small nuclear weapon, the fireball won't actually reach the ground. They have to be slightly lower than that, depending on what the yield is. And you can look up the SAR Bomba and see the worst case scenario of a hypothetical 50 megaton detonation and what that would be and what altitude it would have to be. Anyway, let's move on to the solar storm risk, because I do believe that this is one of the higher category risk, something that's more real than a nuclear EMP, where the nuke being the lowest, a coordinated terrorist or cyber attack being possible, not highly likely, but definitely possible, but that would have a shorter term impact than a major solar storm, such as something like the Carrington event, which they call out right here in the executive summary. So let's see, can I zoom in on this so you can actually see it? Yes, we can. So a Carrington level extreme geomagnetic storm is almost inevitable in the future. And if you do not know about the Carrington event, I suggest that you guys go read about that, because it happened in 1859. A solar scientist, Richard Carrington, was looking at sunspots and noticed a bright flash while he was watching that persisted for several minutes from a large sunspot group that he actually sketched out. And that was coordinated after the fact with what happened in the United States with the telegraph lines. That was kind of when we first had the idea that a geomagnetic storm was a risk to infrastructure. And what ended up happening was some telegraph stations in the United States caught on fire. Some telegraph operators were electrocuted. And in some areas, they were able to disconnect the telegraph itself from the batteries and were able to send and receive messages without batteries connected on either end, which in a roundabout sort of way, they discovered radio before Marconi and Tesla did. But it was through induced currents in the wires that they were able to transmit those messages without batteries being involved in the system. But the probability of one of these events occurring is relatively low at any given time. It's almost inevitable that one will occur eventually. Historical records suggest a period of return of 50 years for the Quebec level storm and 150 years for very extreme storms, such as the Carrington event, which occurred at the writing of this article 154 years ago. So that was, we're already, at the writing of that article, we're already due for the next Carrington level event. So that's one of the reasons why I like to watch the sun. My favorite channel to watch the sun on YouTube here is Space Weather News. Every morning he uploads a video without fail and tells you the latest science news, but what's going on with the sun at the time. Very good source of information, and later on here in the presentation I will get to his website. So the risk of intense geomagnetic storms is elevated as we approach the peak of the current solar cycle. So this was cycle 24. It was projected to peak in 2015. We are now in 2025, so we're in solar cycle 25. That's just a coincidence. It doesn't go by the year like that. And we are, actually, I'll go to Ben's site right now real quick, and I'll show you where we're at. So this is the past solar cycles. So solar cycle 24, can I zoom in? I'll click it and see if it lets me go full screen. There we are, and then I will do this, and we're full screen. So let's see, solar cycle 24 is in the pink down here, and our current cycle 25 is above the last cycle, but it's below the previous cycles. As you can see, if we go back to cycle 21, which was from February of 1976 to roughly is that 1986, August of 86, it looks like. That was a much higher cycle than what the previous cycles that we've had. And it was a double peak cycle. So if you'll notice, a lot of these cycles have double peaks. In the case of cycle 23 from 1996 to 2008, we had a peak and then a second peak that was actually higher. Whereas if we go back the previous cycle before that, the first peak was higher. So the question is, for this cycle, are we going to have that second peak or are we on the downswing? The previous cycle, so 24, was similar to the cycle 23, where we did have that second higher peak. So we don't know where the sun's going to go as far as solar peak this cycle, but we do have a peak and we're on the downswing. Now, if you compare geomagnetic storms and the occurrences of those geomagnetic storms to what's happening in the solar cycle. So you can look at the historical geomagnetic storms and then see what's going on in the solar cycle, and you can correlate that the geomagnetic storms tend to peak towards the middle and end, the downswing, the last third of that solar cycle. So you have your geomagnetic maximum for storms usually on the backside of that solar cycle. So as we go into the end of the current cycle that we are in, we should see more geomagnetic events. Now, if you guys remember, and I don't have this in the source links, but we're going to pull this up. So this was 2024. So let's see, we're going to have visible auroras from Florida. So this is from the Florida Times Union. And let's go to the full screen on this. They were visible from Florida. And let's see, what was the date of this article? So this was June 3rd of 2024. And just so you guys know, seeing the lights, northern lights back in May of May 10th of 2024, that was not a normal occurrence. It was actually seen much further south, down in Puerto Rico. It was actually seen in areas where they did not have data or reports of the northern lights being visible during the Carrington event. So what started that event was a consecutive set of coronal mass ejections that interacted with the Earth's magnetic field and led to the apparition of auroras as far south as Florida and even Puerto Rico. And the level of X-class flares that caused that event and those coronal mass ejections was not anything scary. If I believe it was like an X1 and then like an X2 point something. It wasn't a very big flare or a very large series of flares, but it was enough that with the weakened magnetic field, a lot of that coupled and caused geomagnetic instability. And they did have some voltage control issues at various power plants, but they did not have a grid failure. So it was a pretty light show, but not anything that was world ending. Now, that's not to say that in the future, as Earth's magnetic field continues to weaken, that we would not see something similar at the end of this cycle, where we could possibly have something that a solar storm that could take the grid down. And if you look at the previous, let's go here. There was a huge far side eruption, and this website here is Space Weather News, by the way. Some of the data is updated, some of it's not updated. Let me see if this one is updated. Because of the government shutdown, certain things are not updated. Yeah, this looks to be relatively updated for the nowcast. Let's see. Yeah, 10/29. So yeah, that's kind of old data. That's yesterday's data. We can go back to Space Weather Timeline. This is current to midnight. Coordinated Universal Time, or as I like to call Zulu time. We're still on the tail end of KP5, and the prediction was supposed to be about KP 3.67. So KP 3 3/4 is what the prediction for the next block of time, 3-hour block of time is. Anyway, so those are some of the ways that the power grid can go down in addition to severe weather. With La Nina happening this year, there is definitely the possibility of some wetter than normal conditions in certain areas of the country. Some good Arctic blast coming in, and I'm sorry that this thing keeps zooming in and out. My connection is a little slow, and it's also slow to respond. It's trying to load a lot of data. But yeah, looking at the composite radar right now, nothing really severe, no threats to the grid. We're not seeing any winter precipitation, but this is something I'm going to do with the channel as time progresses on. If we do have some sort of incident like an ice storm or a snowstorm that can cause a power outage, kind of like what happened in Texas a few years ago, where they had that Arctic blast come down from the polar vortex and take out power in Texas. That's a pretty important thing. And if you are running on portable power stations like I am currently, they don't necessarily have the power to run your heat pump and your heat strips and your emergency heating. They'll run a space heater just fine, but space heaters are far more dangerous than using your central HVAC system in a house. And using propane heat, propane is also a consumable, and everybody that's using propane is going to have to go out and find somewhere to get it. And if power is out, you're probably not going to be able to get propane at some places. Not necessarily because the propane tanks are unable to pump out the propane. That is a concern, but it's more of the card processing and that sort of thing. So all of these links that we discussed on today's live stream are going to be in the description box of the video below. So please take the time and check those out, and go read some of these articles for yourself and see what the real world risk is to the power grid. And like I've said before, my most plausible way for the power grid to go down, and go down hard for a long time, is going to be the space weather type of event, is what my personal opinion is. And that's kind of what I am gearing and preparing towards on the homestead here. So we're gonna wrap it up. Thanks for everybody for watching. Please take a minute to like and subscribe to this video if this is the first one that you've seen. And Check my playlist. I have a playlist for the portable Pecaron power stations that I'm using, the East 3600 LFP. I will be doing some more videos on those, probably starting next year or even earlier this year, depending if finances allow and if I can get my channel monetized to where I can have an ad share of revenue from YouTube. I would really like to grow this channel and be able to do the real world layman's type of testing of these portable power stations and really put them through the paces and see what they're actually capable of doing for your average family home and even an off-grid homestead. So anyway, we're going to wrap up the live stream here for tonight. I'll just leave you here with the views of the KP index on Space Weather Live. We're still in a mild geomagnetic storm, nothing to be worried about. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and whatever time of the day it is, have a pleasant morning, night, evening. Thanks for watching.